cattle and bison rancher, state representative, aerial applicator. That's Tom Dent, all of that. Part of his life in rural Moses Lake, Washington. And Tom thinks that it's about time that politicians in all states and Washington, D.C. prioritize easing the burdens on family farmers and ranchers. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Tom knows firsthand the struggles of his fellow ranchers. That's why bison have become his focus instead of cattle. But his focus in the state legislature is getting his colleagues to understand that it's important to protect the environment. However, farmers cannot be overburdened with regulations. He will share some of his ideas during our conversation this week. But first, a question for him about all those jobs. Well, we appreciate you joining us. I wonder if you could start us off by, you basically have had three jobs, right? You're a state legislator, you're a rancher, and you're a pilot. Which one is harder?
Well, probably the biggest challenge is the ranching part.
Okay.
Because of the money issue and the challenges around trying to make it work financially. That's a challenge. And because of that, there's so much work, there's so much to do that you can't oftentimes hire people to help you. So that is the challenge. And the flying the airplanes are the easy part. That's just come second nature to me. I wish everything was the easiest flying an airplane. And then, of course, the legislative job is a challenge. It does challenge you to understand other people, which is how you become successful in that position. You just have to understand people. You have to like people, but spend time with them, get to know them. So it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge. For the most part, and I say for the most part, most of the folks in the legislature are pretty decent people. There's some challenges. There's some on each side of the aisle that are a challenge to work with, but you just find a way around that.
You're a Republican legislator with a Democratic governor. How does that work?
Well, that's the biggest challenge. The governor's not as big a challenge as you might think, but they have a major majority. They have a huge majority in the legislature. So in the House where I'm at, it's 57 to 39 is the 59 to 39. Okay, that's the split, and it's that makes it hard to sometimes move Republican ideas or any ideas for that matter. And the same over the Senate. I think they're something like 20 to 29. There's 49 members in the Senate, so they have a big majority. But I will say that the governor, for the most part, is easier to work with than the legislature because he's. But then he's new. That could change. The past governor was not easy to work with. He was not.
Talk about your ranching life. You've done this for a while. What's that like? Because as well as anyone, it's tough to make the numbers work sometimes.
Oh, it is, and I haven't done that all my life. My dad had a background in agriculture growing up as a child, but that changed. He grew up with a depression in Iowa, and it didn't work well for the family. I mean, some tragedies happened in the family, so the family ended up not being able to keep the ranches and farms together as much as they would have liked to. So, he moved on and had to do other things to make a living. So I didn't have that opportunity growing up to work in that, in the farm and ranching world as much as I would have liked, although I did spend some time with some neighbors I grew up in Eastern Washington here, and there's some neighbors here that spent some time with me and took me to the ranch, and I like the ranch and I like the cows, so it just kind of worked that way. And I started, but it was always a dream of mine to have a ranch. So it flew airplanes to make a living, and I'll tell you the truth, we saved our nickels until we could buy a place, and we got started and had a few cows, and then we kept saving our nickels, and we bought some more land until we were up to about 200 acres now is what we have, and I had about 50 head of cows, mother cows at the major time of my life. But when I was elected to the legislature, having cows, managing cows and calving cows in the springtime when we're in session didn't work. So tried the fall calving thing, and that didn't work either. So But I'd always had a handful of buffalo around. So I sold all the cows and now I have more buffalo and they're much easier to handle as far as take care of because they can take care of themselves. You don't have to help them calve because they won't let you anyway. They just take care of themselves. And so that's kind of where it's at. But it was a unique challenge to get started in this and to make it work, with some background, but learning as I went, a lot of stuff we learned as we went. So it's been a really I was thinking yesterday when I was at work, and I said, it's been a highlight of my life to have the ranch, even though it's not very big, but it was a dream come true and be able to work it, financially, it's been really hard. It just breaks even now. If we're lucky, it breaks even. But there was a time when we made some money. There was a time when we made pretty good money, but not now. It just isn't there. The price of all the commodity. We raise hay and grow grass is what we do, and price of hay is in the basement and just doesn't work. So
And
it's just
you're renting out part of it now, right?
I do. I rent out the hayfield, so you can just I just couldn't make it work, and I could bale my hay, but I had to hire somebody to cut it and hire somebody to put it, to stack it.
Mhm.
So that takes away from some of your profit. So it was a challenge. So we just rented some of it out, and I have plenty to do with the legislative job, and still managing the buffalo herd, and I have a family that takes some time. So I try not to steal all their time to work on the ranch.
Well, I wanted to have you on the podcast for a variety of reasons because I think you bring a unique background, both from the ag side and politics, where you're trying to advocate for each other, and you've been part of several different things. And I wonder first if we can talk about your state is similar to a lot of other states in that the number of smaller producers is shrinking. Obviously, this has been kind of a national thing too. From your perspective, what do we need to do to better support our smaller producers, or is this inevitable that we're just going to keep losing these folks and our operations are just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger?
I don't know that we're going to continue to lose them, but we do need to support them in some way. So if we go back to the Depression when Franklin Roosevelt was president, and he worked hard to bring us out of the Depression and prop up our farmers, right? And then we have a farm program because it was important. And he was a forward thinker, and he could see that we needed to maintain our food production, on our soil, in America. And he saw that that was important, and it was also important that we began the cheap food policy, which kind of came along with the farm programs, right? So we keep our guys propped up, and we still have the farm program. We're still doing these things, okay? So, but I think the thing that we've lost sight of is that we've regulated our farmers. We have such a regulatory burden on them coming out of the different states that we're crushing them. So even though we have a farm program that's designed to keep them propped up, the regulatory load that we're putting on them is crushing them back down, and they can't carry that load. They can't do it. And so what you end up with is you take a small farmer, a small place like ours, what happens is the wife ends up working in town so they can have some kind of health insurance, right? She gets a job so they have some health insurance. And the husband's out there quite often working by himself, or maybe just one hired man. He's dealing with the minimum amount of labor that he can hire, okay, to make this work. And because part of it is because of the regulatory load that's on them, they just can't carry the load. And so we're going to have to look at how we can lighten that load and help our farmers, better produce their crops, and understanding that a farmer, a rancher, is a price taker, not a price setter. And that's what most people in America don't understand. The farmer, the rancher, gets what the market is. He doesn't say, well, I want $500 for my cow, and it only gets 250, right? That's the market. Well, he may want 500, but he's going to get 250. That's how it works, okay? And so we have to realize that. And then also, back on the input side, the inputs have continually ratcheted up, and a lot of this is due to regulatory action from the different state legislators, not so much from the U.S. government, some, but mostly from the states. So all of these things are putting the load on the farmer, which is making it not work. And if we want to keep our small farms in business, then we're going to have to help them. We're going to have to reduce that regulatory load so they can stay in business.
So give us something practical that you'd like to see reduced. What's some kind of regulatory burden that can be reduced without some kind of harm elsewhere?
Well, the environmental protections and requirements we put on our farmers is one, what they can do. The uh, it's like we think they don't care for the environment, so we tell them they have to do all these things. We add additions, we remove pesticides from the ability, remove the ability of our farmers to use certain pesticides, or we remove the ability for them, or we put specific challenges on them the only times that they can't use them. Little things like that just take away from them. And I think we can do better. We have in the state of Washington, our Department of Agriculture really wants to support our farmers, and they're doing a good job. But the Department of Ecology looks at it from a different way, right? You can't do these things. They say you can't challenge all this stuff, and they say they own all the waters of the state. So if you do anything wrong with the water, even though it's on your place, and I don't know a farmer rancher that wants to do that. I don't know a single farmer or rancher that wants to destroy, or bring harm to their ranch and farm, or to the waters or anything else. They're all out there. They're the true environmentalists, because without their property, without their land, they don't. What do they have? They have nothing, right? They need to maintain that, and they know that. So.
One
I hope
thing,
that was an answer for you. So.
yeah, of course. Will you talk a little bit about the cap and invest that you have out there? How does that work? Because I know you've been involved in discussions about how to make sure you're talking about regulatory, but also just the challenge of a small producer trying to keep up with everything,
Right.
which is tough when you're not a very, super wealthy person where you got a team of accountants and lawyers and all this stuff doing it, and they tell you what you need to do, and you send them your check, and everybody's good. But when you're doing it all yourself and running the farm or the ranch, I mean, it's a lot to keep track of, right? So will you talk about how this works and what you're trying to do with it to make it work better for the smaller ones?
Well, sure. So, the cap and trade thing here, what it works, they have an auction every few months. And so these different entities that produce carbon into the air, okay? So they have to buy carbon credits at these auctions. So whatever the carbon credit might be, then they're going to pass it on to the consumer, right? That's how it works. That's not a secret. They don't have a price setting thing going on, right? A price taker. They can set their prices. So what has happened is taken the price of fuel and it's ratcheted up, depending on the latest auction, it could be anywhere from 40 cents to over 50 cents a gallon for fuel is how it's increased the price of fuel. So we had a rebate program here when that first started, and that took a couple of years for them to even figure that out, for the state to figure that out. And so that allowed the farmers, ranchers who were, because what we did when the original, I should back up here a little bit, the original legislation said farmers are exempt. They are exempt from this, okay? But this was how they were going to rebate them. So you paid the money and then you could apply for the rebate, okay? And it was kind of a little bit of a wonky program. If you were somewhere between 0 and 1,000 gallons, you got this much. If you're between 1,000 and 20,000, you got this much. Okay, so it wasn't like you got 1,592 gallons and you got that much rebate. It's not how it worked. It was just kind of a wonky deal. It was just in a range. Okay, so you might get more than you were entitled to, or you might get less, but you still had to do the reporting. You had to put it in, and request it, etc. So what I saw was many of our younger farmers who are more computer literate and are used to this stuff, they were doing, kind of okay with this program. But the older fellas, that if they weren't using computers, it wasn't so good. They really had a challenge with that. So, but also the promise was that they were exempt. Okay. The promise was farmers, ranchers are exempt from this. Okay, so we did a bill last year with the help of our new governor. He stepped up and sided with me on this, and we were able to point of sale, you're exempt. Okay, so you never have to pay the carbon tax as you buy the fuel up until 2030. Then we're gonna have to start over again. Okay, we're not done yet, but we're good for the moment. But that was the big challenge, was was getting it to where they didn't have to pay it at all, because we all know if you're even a medium-sized farmer here farming 1,000 acres, so you would be you could have several $1,000s in this tax. You're
Hmm.
burning 30,000 gallons of fuel. Uh, maybe so that's $15,000, right? Well, that's a fair amount of money. And if you've already paid that, well, I'm betting you paid that with money you borrowed from the bank or your lending institution, right? And so now you're wanting to get that rebate back, and you have to kind of work on that, and that's a challenge. So this way, you never have to pay it. Now, we do have certain fuel suppliers within the country, within the state, that they have the card lock systems and such, that are computerized systems.
Hmm.
So they're able to just eliminate that from what they charge you as fuel, and it makes a big difference. It's going to make a huge difference for many of our farmers, because they don't have to borrow the money to pay the dang tax and wait for it to get a rebate.
All right, I'm going to show my ignorance here, but so does this mean so if you're driving into town and buying your fuel there, how at the point of sale are you distinguishing between this is personal use, this is
Sure, sure.
commercial
So
use?
yeah, we have there's many card lock systems out there, right? I know you have them in Iowa. I've been there. So but you have your card, you go down to to the fuel supplier, you put the
Mhm.
card in. Well, the card will be programmed for
Okay.
who you are. Okay, it's just that simple. Now the point of sale thing doesn't mean you could go to every gas station in the state of Washington and buy exempt fuel, because that's not practical, right? It's just not practical. But the major fuel suppliers of agricultural fuels, then you'll be able to do that. And
Okay.
and then we have red diesel. The red diesel thing is that's just exempt, so that makes it easier too.
Okay. What do you think? You also have done dealt with overtime, right?
Yes, sir.
And if I'm remembering this correctly, there's about a 12-week exemption in there where employees, as long as they're working fewer than 50 hours, then they are not required to receive overtime the rest of the time they would. How is this all working out?
Well, we've ratcheted up our farm labor cost um, several percentage points. I think the American Farm Bureau, they on their study said the state of Washington pays 462% more for their labor costs than any other state. Okay, so it's not working well. And I have a bill to kind of give us some a little bit of freedom from that during harvest, different times of the year. So when you have the high hours, and because it's just, I mean, when they're selling apples for less than the cost of production, that's a typical crop of high labor that's not working to pay these guys overtime. So what happened is they're leaving the apples on the trees. They're
Hmm.
just not doing it, because you can't buy high and sell low and think you're going to make a profit, right? It doesn't work. And so we do need and the farm workers, they don't want the overtime, because what happens is then they're getting cut back on their hours, and they for the most part, not all of them, but the majority of them are coming from Mexico, Central America, some from South America. But they've come up here to work a season, and they came to work. um, and one of the arguments about doing the overtime bill was, well, they have families, they want to spend time with their families and go to kids' soccer games and stuff. Well, that's fine, except their families aren't here. For the most part, their families are somewhere else, and these folks come up here to work. They want to make as much as they can. They want to go home, and I've never, I mean, we always have an opportunity to go to different events with different folks, depending on what the subject is. But I've never felt more passion from these farm workers, even though many of them can't speak English and I don't speak Spanish. I know a few words, not a lot, right? But they love me for trying to help them get rid of the overtime, because they want to work more hours. They know how to make that work, and they just really do. They don't want the overtime. The growers don't want the overtime, but we have the overtime. So we need to back that up, and at least give them a shot in the harvest, so they can have a block of time where they don't have to pay that overtime.
So where do you see this going on the federal level if the Trump administration well, we're kind of waiting to see. We're talking in late August, I should say, as we're talking to you. So we'll see how this all shakes out. He's made a few comments about maybe the farmers can kind of vouch for workers, or we'll see. Then I can't tell from the agri secretary if she's on the same page or what it is here. But if we're going to at the least reduce the number of folks coming from other countries working in agriculture, so if we are more dependent on American citizens doing these, then to play devil's advocate to what you're talking about, what's happened in the state of Washington, are we going to have to pay Americans more money? Are they going to be willing to not work for overtime, let's say, on these operations, regardless of in harvest, if it's not really practical for the most part to work fewer than 40?
No, it's not practical. So in the state of Washington, I mean, the folks that live here, that there's a farm labor union here, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and mostly they're from folks that live here. There's not enough people in that. They don't have enough members to do the work. They don't. Yet they're pushing back on this. And as far as what's going on, most of these folks are up here to work legally. They have their permits, they have their green cards, whatever it is they need.
Mm-hmm.
They're here to work legally. So as far as, are there some here illegal? Well, I'm sure, but I don't think that's a big portion of what's here. Okay. So what Trump is, I mean, he backed up because, he did the right thing by saying, no, we're not going to be targeting farm labor because that's how we feed ourselves. So that was the right thing to do. And he did. But I just think that we need to, if these folks, they're gonna find other places to work, and the other part, we're not the only country in the world that produces food, right, and needs labor. So pretty soon they're going to find other places to go, and that's going to be our challenge, is how we're able to navigate that. So to say it, we have our farm labor folks. We need to have them up here, and we worked really hard to set up programs to bring them up here. And let's maybe we should ask what they want. I think it's important. I think I do a lot of work in foster children arena and childcare, things like that. But maybe we should ask the people what they want. I always believe that we should do that. The ones that are doing the work, the ones that are in the game, the ones that are actually in the trenches. What do you want for what we're doing here? How does it structure for you? And we might, and that's, we've had those rallies, and they're telling us, we don't want overtime. We just want to work, and they're okay with working, 14, 16 hours a day. They don't have a problem with that, right? They're not afraid to work. Unlike some of folks that live here, they don't want to work that much, right?
All right, so talking about afraid to do things, as you well know, your federal counterparts, whether they're reluctant, afraid, whatever, they haven't dealt with immigration forever. And so that's a big part of why we're in such a mess. And it's pure chaos right now. So you know how the sausage is made on a state level. So if these folks would call you up and say, hey, what do we do here? We're actually going to do something so that it can be done legislatively, not all with executive orders and all kinds of other stuff. What is a practical matter to make sure that your constituent families have the labor they need, and this is done so that the folks who are in our country have legal status in whatever that is, whether it's temporary, what have you? What do you want to see done here? If the president or Speaker Johnson or whoever calls you and asks for some advice.
Yeah. I really believe that we probably need a farm labor program. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it. We probably need a farm labor program that deals with simply farm labor, okay, and where you can apply for the whether it's a green card or a visa, whatever piece of paper that makes you legal to be here. We need that, and we need to make it easy. Okay, it can't be so hard that they have a hard time understanding it, or they have to pay somebody to help them. It has to be something that's relatively simple that they can understand, and understand that. And don't misunderstand what I'm trying to say here, but their education level, is what it is. Okay, and our education level is what it is, and we have to understand and give them a program that they can understand with their education level. And also, just to be grateful that they're willing to come and live away from home. I mean, they're living away from home, okay? And to come up and to work hard and the kind of work that they do and to do the job as well as they know how. They're willing to do this. We should keep that in mind as well, okay? And so make it simple for them to be here. And yeah, if they want to if they need a time limit, we could probably figure out a time limit, but it's going to, there's folks up here that's in some of these orchards, they're working pretty hard, 8, 9, 10 months out of the year. So, but we have to set it up to where they can be here, where it's easy and simple for them to make it work. And if we make it where they got to jump through 100 hoops, it's not going to be so good. If they got to jump through 10 hoops, that's a different story.
This is
We
an
have a
abrupt.
tendency in all of our bureaucracy to make everything difficult to justify our existence.
Yeah. I know I'm pushing you on time here a little bit, but and sorry for an abrupt subject change, but another thing you're passionate about that I want to make sure we discuss before we say goodbye. You have been working on statewide level, and we've had there are similar conversations in other states when you're talking about mental health and the mental health needs and support of our producers, especially in these smaller communities. What needs to be done with this? And I don't mean this as any kind of a age thing about you, but you're a guy who's been around a few years, right? But your generation in particular, this is stuff you probably grew up just bottling up inside for the most part, right? And you can feel like you're out there on an island doing all of this stuff, but you have decided that you're trying to make this kind of more at the forefront. We got to do a better job of supporting. So can you explain what you think needs to be done?
Sure. So, I grew up in the era of suck it up, buttercup, go get her done,
Yeah.
And that's reality. That's what we grew up with. And we also grew up with the stigma of mental health, not a good thing. If you have a mental health issue, then you're just crazy or something, right? And that's wrong too, because, we tell our people that, you have a heart problem, let's go down and get your heart fixed. You can recover, all these different things you can recover from. But if you're mentally ill, well, we say you can recover, but we're not allowing people to recover. That's what it is, amounts to. But we have to encourage folks to realize what kind of a challenge it really is to have a mental illness, okay, or just to be mentally overloaded too sometimes. So Sigmund Freud, I think, is the one that said the line between sanity and insanity is a pretty fine line, right? Okay, well, when I was in college, I studied psychology. I did, and I found it absolutely fascinating, just fascinating. But I will tell you, I knew that I was an outside guy, and that was an inside job, and that's why I didn't pursue that. I would have loved to done that, but I just today I can work inside, but in those days, no way, right? So, but the challenge that we're having in our industry right now is all the challenges we talked about, the regulatory challenge, the financial challenges, from all angles is coming at the people in the agricultural world, including, and we're also talking about the rural communities and the local car dealer, the people that own the local restaurant, cafe, and all these things. I mean, when things are good, farmers come in for coffee, don't buy breakfast, right? They do something to save them. They save those nickels, okay, because they normally have to. So that puts a bigger and bigger and bigger load on them. And and I have some history, a lot of history going back in my life of knowing people that have had mental health challenges and suicide issues and things like this. And so I just feel like we need to do something to help them. And when I was studying this, actually J.T. Wilcox, Representative Wilcox, when he was in the legislature, and I was there when I was first there, he ran a bill to study the mental health and suicide issues around agriculture. It was a pretty light study bill, and then after that he became, and I was on that bill. I signed right on, but and then he became our leader. So he said, "Tom, I want you to take this. I want you to take this and run with it because as a leader, they don't have time to run legislation." So I did. So that's where I really got immersed in this. Was we have to do something because this is a major issue, and when the agriculture sector it has the highest suicide rate of any sector in the United States of America. That's something to pay attention to, right? And the thing that bothers me and what makes me pay even more attention is it's 3.5 times higher than what's in second place. So that's not good, right? So we're overloading the people that are taking care of us, that are growing our food, and we're not helping them. And we need to find ways to help them. I truly believe we can. One of the things we have to work really, really hard on the stigma of mental health and get people to look at that is, any one of us can have a mental health issue any one day, okay? And it doesn't mean that we're not going to recover and be fine. But let's take a practical approach to what that looks like and how we can help these folks. And also to understand that quite often they become so overloaded with what they're doing in their life. There's so much to do. I tell people right now, even I got a small place, okay, and I got my son that helps me some, and my wife helps me some. But you know what? There's always something to do there. Always. There's never a time when, oh, I don't need to go home. There's nothing to do. Yeah, right. In your dreams, okay. But so remember that they're so overloaded that they pretty soon they're not doing any social life. They're not going out to dinner with their friends. They're not going to the movies. They skip church because, well, they want that Sunday morning because they got stuff to do. And pretty soon then the strain and the stress of what they're doing begins to overcome them, right? And I think that we need to understand that we can help them through that. And it's something that we really have to take a hard look at. We did a study on this, and the biggest issues that came out of the study, the stressors, and this is what troubled me. What has taken a normally sane human being, that's out there doing what he loves to do and putting him in a position where he wants to take his own life, okay? What are the stressors that are doing that? And we saw a lot of them in our report that we put out. We just put it out June 1st. But they don't, the biggest stressors are financial and regulatory overload. Those are the two biggest stressors, okay? There's a lot of other ones, but those are the two major ones. So how can we help them do that? How can we help them with to overcome some of these things? Then that's the challenge that we have to make, and these are where we need to go with this. But I'm very concerned that if we don't do something, this trend is going to continue. It's going to just continue the way we're going, the road we're going on. So how do we do that? Well, I think we look at it and be real and say, this is a real problem. Any place I go, and if anybody wants me to come and talk about anything, whether it's foster health, child care, transportation, all the things I'm involved in, but I'll always talk about mental health is something that we all need to be aware of. You need to be aware of your family, your friends, and how they're doing. If they're not doing well, don't be afraid to ask them. Don't be afraid to love them. Don't be afraid to hug them, because that's what we all need. We can all get overwhelmed. And I think that our population has become to the point that we ignore others sometimes when we shouldn't be, so but I'm just, I have a little passion around that.
Yeah.
But I do think that I think we can make a difference. I really believe we can make a difference and help people become healthy, mentally healthy. Okay.
Yeah.
And but also let's remember what they're doing for us. I mean, farming, ranching is a way of life. It's not a job. Okay. It's not a career. It's what we do. It's who we are. And some people just they don't want to be that. They can't do it. And that's no problem. I get that. But there is a culture there that is something that is a connection with the land that I can't really explain it. But I see in your expressions that you understand that, Dave. And so let's help those people with that connection so they keep feeding us with and really. This is the most abundant, healthiest food supply the world has ever known, what we produce right here in the United States of America, right? And we should remember that too. We should be grateful for these people, what they're doing for us.
Well said. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your time and insight. Thank you much.
You're most certainly welcome.
To learn more about Representative Tom Dent's background, check out our profile piece about him. You'll find it in the American Farmland Owner newsletter, the place where landowners get their news. It's free. It comes out every Friday. Search it up right now at AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. Thanks for your support. Thanks for helping us grow this podcast. And thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.